Welcome, gals. Please come in, sit down. Be careful not to ruin your dresses. Today, we are keeping up with our history lessons, which are starting to get a little bit repetitive, because in May, I'm not sure what's up with this month of the year. We have already covered Colombia becoming independent, and then we have seen Croatia winning the referendum for independence after Quebec pathetically failed to free itself from Canada. Today, instead, we move over just a few steps away from Croatia because the Republic of Montenegro in 2006, just 15 years ago, actually held the referendum proposing the independence from Serbia, and they won, although with just 55% of the votes. I mentioned yesterday that we would have started talking about the points in the news for the build in the PTR for 9.1 related to balance tuning and balance changes, obviously. So for today, we have the additional things that we have left behind, and we are starting, of course, with the more important one, which is the changes related to the Shards of Domination, which is going to be the new, I guess we can call at this point, borrowed power, the new system to empower your characters come 9.1. Blizzard already posted their list of patch notes for this new build, which mentions the Shards of Domination is going to be select gear that is going to drop in the raid and can be enhanced by Shards of Domination, which can be found from defeating bosses in Sanctum of Domination. There are 9 different shards and can be upgraded to rank 5 with Stygian Embers, a new currency earned by defeating the Sanctum of Domination bosses. This gear can total up to have 5 different sockets available, and a maximum of 5 shards can be socketed at one time. This, for the record, has no bearings on the sockets that you can get from Venari, on the sockets that you can put on the gear with the new system in Cortia. What we currently have with Venari, basically. Those are not the same sockets, okay? And before going into details with these, just to make it clear even more, these are the slots when it comes to normal sockets versus the Shard of Domination sockets, but more importantly, legendaries, right? Plenty of classes are going to get an overlap with these type of slots. If you are very unlucky, maybe Blizzard hasn't even thought about this, there are going to be certain legendaries which can only be put into a couple of these slots, meaning you have to forego 1 gem of this new system, but I don't think it's gonna happen. Either way, Solash will be made so easy to obtain, and even now you can start stockpiling on it to get 2 of the same legendary in 2 different slots if you are one of the unlucky ones who have it in one of these slots. For example, me playing a shaman, the helmet is for the best in slot for Restoration Shaman, and that's the helmet that will have a Shadow Domination slot. You have the boots, which are my second Restoration Shaman legendary and my best in slot Elemental Shaman legendary. This is also a slot for the Shard of Domination piece of gear, so many specs are going to find this problem eventually, which means you have to look at this into advance, so this is why I gave you the loot table. Now moving on to the actual shards. So we have already gone over this system, which is now getting more detailed and more in-depth in the way it works. The shards have now gone through their reality show. They have gone through a few days and a few weeks since the first time they were data mined, and now we have gone down to just 9. 3 are going to be red, 3 are going to be blue, and 3 are going to be purple, or Blood, Frost, and Unholy. So looking at the Blood ones first, you have the Shard of Beck, which is going to be your damage is increased by 2% when you have 50% or more health than your target. It has 5 ranks, so it starts at 2 and it's gonna cap at 3%. So this is basically 3% more damage. Now you see, first of all, basically the value, the power of this shard, roughly 3%. So we're not talking about massive borrowed powers yet. This also gives you a rather consistent value. Very often, by the time the boss starts getting lower and lower in HP, the enemy, even in Mythic Plus, starts getting lower and lower in HP. This is going to give you some pretty good value. The other one is the Shard of Jas, or Jas. Incoming healing you receive is increased by 1.1%, and your maximum health is increased by whatever number this is going to be. Pretty sure it's not 2. And it's going to go all the way up to 1.5%. This is obviously mostly going to be a thing for tanks and not really much else. And then you have the last one, which is the Shard of Rev, which gives you Leech, which is of course particularly good for healers, given how much value many healers put on Leech, but still we don't have the number. Then you have the Frost Shard or the Blue Shard. You have the Shard of Core, which is going to increase your damage by 3% for 20 seconds after attacking an enemy you have not yet damaged. This is the type of Mythic Plus shard. We have a couple of similar Soulbind passives, which are making Night Fae pretty popular and pretty strong in Mythic Plus, particularly Corain as something very similar, and this one ties itself with that style very well. The rank 5 of this shard gives you 4.5% more damage for 20 seconds. 20 seconds is more than enough to unload your burst damage in a new Mythic Plus pool. So this would be and will be pretty popular in Mythic Plus in terms of power-ups. You have the Shard of Tel. Your critical heals cause their target to absorb the next 228 damage dealt to them within the next 6 seconds and scales all the way up to 342. This is interesting because it has some elements of scaling with Critical Strike. Of course, the more you crit on average, the more important the crit is for your spec as a healer, the more value you can get out of this gem. Then again, if the base value, if the base strength of this gem is very weak, there won't really be a reason for you to focus crit just to get more value out of this gem. We will have to see exactly how they synergize with HOTS. Because of course, specs that have the most healing are specs that have HOTS, because they have ticking healing happening very, very often. So there seems to be no indication that the absorb generated is based on the amount healed. So whether or not you are critting for 50k with a healing wave or you are critting for 2k with a rejuvenation tick, the absorb is going to pop anyways, meaning if it works like that, hot specs like Restoration Druid or even Holy Priests with pretty wide AoE healing abilities could gain pretty good benefit from this shard. The last of the Frost Shards is the Shard of Kyr. While standing still, you gain an absorb every 5 seconds up to a cap, 4.4k at rank 1, 6.6k at max rank, another of the tank shards. Technically, it could also be decent for DPS and healers, honestly, as an extra utility one, because remember, you can use up to 5 gems. You don't really have 5 output, 5 DPS gems available, so you will likely be able to end up with 1 or 2 extra slots to fill. This one seems like a pretty decent one. Then you have the last of the Shards of Domination, which is the purple one. The Shard of Diz, as damaging a target increases your damage done to the target by 0.33%. for 4 seconds, stacking up 3 times. So at max rank is going to be 0.5% of damage for 4 seconds, stacking up to 1.5. So rather than the Shard of Beck giving you 3% more damage if you have 50% more health than your target, this one gives you 1.5% always. So half as much, but it's always active, which seems like a decent trade-off, particularly if the hardest part of the encounter or the toughest part of the encounter is at the start or close to the middle, where you're gonna always have this and it's gonna be harder for you to have the red shard active. The other Unholy Shard is the Shard of Zed. Your helpful spells and abilities have a chance to grant your target an unholy aura, draining health from nearby enemies every 2 seconds for 10 seconds. This starts at draining 221 health, and at rank 5 is going to drain 334. Now, we don't, again, know exactly how this works properly, but in Mythic Plus, it could be pretty useful. Maybe you're pulling 10 enemies, you proc this on your tank, the tank can drain 334 health from nearby enemies every 2 seconds. Maybe it drains health from every single one of the enemies, maybe there is no cap, not sure yet. But it's yet another one of these helpful effects for healers, and might be even possible to use this as a tank with healing abilities. The last one of the unholy ones is the shit one, again the utility one, the last slot, maybe you will fill in, which is the speed. The Shard of Oth is going to increase your speed, and that is it. We don't even have the actual number for it yet. Now, about these shards, what is more interesting is that we know that Runic Dominion is going to be the buff that you'll be able to get with these shards. Having 3 shards of the same color is going to grant you the power of a rune ward. What is important to remember about this is that this is the one that is going to work only in the raid. So all of the shard powers that we have just gone through are going to work everywhere, including arenas, including Mythic Plus. Only this new bonus, this new rune ward, is what is going to be limited to raid encounters. So we have Bloodlink for having 3 different red shards embedded in your gear. While inside the Maw or Torghast, which includes the Sanctum of Domination raid, damaging an enemy establishes a Bloodlink. Bloodlink pulses every 3 seconds, dealing whatever shadow damage and healing you for 100% of the damage dealt. If your Bloodlink would overheal you, it instead heals a nearby ally. Of course, this is going to be decided by just how much damage you're going to do. The first thing I read this is, I wonder what happens if 20 people have the Bloodlink enabled and 19 people are at full HP and only the tank is taking damage. Are you going to have 19 people funneling the heal to the single tank and make him invincible? I don't know. We just have to see the actual numbers and how powerful this is going to be. This seems to be, however, just flat damage. Just a proc for shadow damage, and that's it. Then you have Winds of Winter, which is your frost benefit from having 3 different shards of frost enabled in your gear. While inside the Maw or Torghast, each time you deal a critical strike, the winds accumulate 6% of that crit up to a cap of whatever number per critical strike. Every 20 seconds, the winds unleash, dealing frost damage equal to the total accumulation and surrounding you in winds for 20 seconds, absorbing 100% of the damage dealt. This is similar to abilities like Cloudburst. For Shaman, you put down Cloudburst, it absorbs 30% of the healing you do, and then it blows up. In this case, it's going to absorb, 20, maybe 10, maybe 5% of the crits you are doing, and every 20 seconds that amount is going to be released in damage while also giving you back a shield. This could also be pretty powerful. We don't know if it has a cap, we don't know if it has a limit, or if it has an internal cooldown, meaning, for example, what happens with this with a Fire Mage during combustion that has guaranteed crits. Is it going to create a nuclear bomb at the end of combustion because of this Winds of Winter effect? Who knows? We don't know the numbers yet, but it seems promising. It seems to get some benefits for specs that synergize with crit, scale with crit, focus on crit, so it seems interesting in that regard. The last of the bonuses with gems is going to be the Unholy one, Chaos Bane. While, again, inside the Maw or Torghast, your spells and abilities have a chance to drain a soul fragment from your target, granting you 10 primary stat for 30 seconds, and stacking up to 15 times. When you reach 15 stacks, which would be the equivalent of 150 of your primary stat, you unleash Chaos Bane, dealing shadow damage split between nearby enemies and granting you 300 primary stat for 15 seconds. Well, now we are talking a little bit more. Okay, so the first one we have gone through, Bloodlink, is a flat-out bunch of shadow damage. Doesn't really scale with anything, not really affected by some of your secondary stats becoming bigger, maybe just by crit, if you can actually crit with that effect. Then you have Winds of Winter, which scales, of course, very heavily with crit, because it is based on you critting. And then lastly, we have Chaos Bane, which is going to scale with your primary stat. So there are many specs who don't scale that well with primary stat, who would rather keep stacking their haste or their mastery or their crit over their intellect or their strength or their agility. So in some cases, this is not going to be that powerful, but there are other specs that are going to benefit a lot from primary stats. And this seems like a big number, because getting 150 primary stat and then another 300 primary stat for 15 seconds is pretty big. So these meta buffs seem pretty interesting, they seem pretty cool. You have these color matching that you have to do. You can put in 5 sockets, but you need to have 3 of the same color, and then the other 2 can be whatever. What is also worth mentioning is that, as was pointed out by Blizzard, this is what you will be needing for your upgrading, which is the Stygian Ember, which is about upgrading your ranks of your gems. Now, even though we have this one in the loot table already, we don't exactly know where these gems are going to come from. Are they going to drop from the bosses? Like, are you going to get them very quickly from your first clears and then you can just keep them forever and you won't really have to look for them anymore? Or is it going to be a nightmare, like finding corruptions, or like spam buying benthic until you get the proper one with the socket? We actually don't know about that. Before moving on from this system, we have to mention that the Stygian Ember being a currency from bosses is actually pretty good. To remind people of a little thing they might be forgetting or overlooking, giving a currency lootable from your bosses that you can empower your character in some way, because these gems are going to empower you, is going to make things like re-clearing, things like farming, things like killing bosses as an incentive. Because even if you loot whatever you needed to loot from the boss, even if you cleared the raid and you got your gear and you're just not interested anymore in the actual loot, at the very least, re-clearing the raid is going to continue to feed you these embers that you can use to empower your sockets, your Shards of Domination. So at least now you have more incentives in clearing the raid and re-clearing the raid. Now this one and the Shards of Domination were the big one, the big change for the week, the big addition for the week. What we have gotten in addition to this. Number one, let's start with a weird one. Let's start with an interesting one, which is the Devouring Cold being added in the Kel'Thuzad loot table. You are going in the Kel'Thuzad loot table, there is a bunch of testing items being put in, and then bam, right there is the finished Devouring Cold. What's interesting about this, besides being a callback to the old Kel'Thuzad weapons, is the fact that it reads, use, adjust your weapon. It has an effect, an in-game effect for the weapon that is not going to be combat themed. So it's not going to give you any damage or tankiness or whatever effectiveness. It's just going to have some cosmetic use. What I found more annoying, as usual, as it often happens, the mythic version of this weapon is quite unironically the worst looking of the four. LFR, but more importantly, normal and heroic are actually looking better than the mythic one. That tends to happen many times when you don't give mythic gear extra effects, extra particle effects or something cooler, and you just recolor them. That's pretty annoying. Now, besides this, Blizzard is adding a Mythic Plus key generator. That's right. Tashup in the All of Holding in Oribos will now offer a keystone to players who do not have a keystone as long as they have completed at least one Shadowlands dungeon in Mythic Plus difficulty, ever. Tashup now spawns at the end of Mythic Plus dungeons as well. Mythic Plus dungeons that you have completed before the time limit is reached, so that you did not deplete, is now going to offer you a one-time keystone exchange to any player whose current keystone is at or below the level of the dungeon that was recently completed on time. For people who do not understand, if you had a 15 key and you get invited to do a plus 18 and you complete the plus 18 in time, Tashup is going to spawn at the end of your plus 18 and is going to offer you an equivalent key, because your key, your plus 15, was at or below the level of the one you just completed, which was a plus 18. If the opposite happened, if you had a plus 18 and you completed a plus 15, then he wouldn't trade you any Mythic Plus keys. We also have gotten an addition, a change in the rewards you can get in the Great Vault. No, unfortunately, do not get excited. There is nothing related to items and to gear. The only thing that is going to be added is the disappointment loot. The one that, instead of giving you a bunch of Stygia and nothing else, now is instead going to offer you 3 tokens, 3 attendance token of merit, which you can then choose to spend in whichever way you want, related to Anima, Stygia, or Soulash, and then a bunch of materials for your professions. These numbers have also been increased. For example, you can get up to 750 Soulash from the weekly Great Vault if you don't get gear, or 1500 Stygia, or 525 Anima. Now, not that is going to be very relevant at the start of 9.1, because you will be very low in item level, so it's going to be very hard, very unlucky for you to actually not get any upgrades from the Vault for quite a while, because you will be 225-ish, and you will start seeing 240, 250 items from the Vault for several weeks, so very likely you're not going to have to deal with this for a few weeks, if not a few months, actually. The last of the additions, which we have left for last because it is mostly meaningless, installing a Conduit costs 1 energy, still, but increasing your renown is now going to recharge 1 energy, together to what we had before, which was recharging every 24 hours, 1 energy point. Now, I know how everyone feels about Conduit energy being shit. Repeating this every time there is any news related to Conduit energy is not going to change much, I don't think. Blizzard is kind of set in staying in this hole they dug for themselves with Conduit energy, and no, I don't understand it either. Closing on a pretty funny, but also pretty depressing point, is the data mining of the Mythic Plus score. This isn't funny or depressing either, it's just the additions of the Keystone Conqueror, Keystone Explorer, and Keystone Master that is going to be in Season 2, except that now, of course, is going to be based on your rating and no longer on completing all keys at +5, +10, and +15 level. Blizzard is starting with a tentative 750 rating, 1500 rating, and then 2000 rating for the 3 achievements. It doesn't mean much of anything because nobody knows exactly how much this rating is going to be worth. The funny and depressing part is part of the overlay, part of the UI system for this scoring in Mythic Plus, the one that congratulates you for your new record for the challenge mode time dungeon chat link. Your Sanguine Depths plus 15 was completed in 32.42 seconds. This is a new record. Great. The sad part is the announcement that is going to pop up even if you do this in an overtime key. The sadness of being congratulated at the end of a 1 hour and 47 minute run the other side with 74 deaths, telling you that this is your new record. That is bad. Overtime record in and of itself is an oxymoron. So this was all that we had for the day. The majority of it was of course related to the Shards of Domination because this is what we are getting as a borrowed power for 9.1. We as players have gotten some pretty bad experiences with borrowed powers in the last expansion, the last couple of expansions, so we always have to tread very carefully whenever a new borrowed power is being introduced because more often than not they have been abominations, especially at the start. Blizzard is known to take several weeks and months to fix the initial release of these borrowed powers before they can be even remotely acceptable. We have seen this in Legendaries, in Legion, we have seen this in even the Relics, as well as the Azerite Armor in BFA, followed by even the Corruptions, much worse, in BFA. So they have been often terrible. This one being introduced seems very lax. It seems very lax to the point that the main worry about this system is that it's not going to be powerful enough to make people care, powerful enough to feel good, to be good as a power, which might be for many people a good enough way. Not have their character completely taken over, completely hijacked by a borrowed power, to the point that they are no longer playing their class or their spec, they are just playing a Vision of Perfection simulator, or they are just playing an Infinite Stars simulator, so they would enjoy a more laid-back borrowed power system. That's more my style, if it comes to my opinion. So let me guys know what you think about this borrowed power, which seems like a tiny one so far. And thank you guys for watching the video. If you have enjoyed, you should consider subscribing to the channel, because if you don't, then you know what's gonna happen. By this point, not many who haven't are left to tell the tale. So, see you guys soon, and in the meantime, you depleted a +6 Mists of Tir Naseath. Congratulations, this is your new record.